This week on the Communicators, a discussion on how the Obama administration wants to use technology to improve transparency in government actions. Our guest is Aneesh Chopra, the Chief Technology Officer of the United States.
Well, we are pleased to welcome to the Communicators this week Aneesh Chopra, who is the Chief Technology Officer of the United States. Joining in the questioning, Cecilia Kang of the Washington Post. Mr. Chopra, thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm a big fan.
Please describe what your job is as Chief Technology Officer.
Well, thank you for asking. Actually, it's a relatively old job with a bit of a new twist. I serve as the Associate Director for Technology in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, a position that is Senate confirmed, and I had the honor of receiving that confirmation in May. That role is a role that's been around for decades, and it largely involves three things: advising the President on issues of technology policy, ensuring that we can coordinate amongst agencies on the effective use of technology, and in budget season, we provide guidance on investment strategies that reflect the President's priorities. That's the role that's been around for quite some time. The President chose to elevate the purpose and the role of technology and innovation across a much larger range of topics. So he'd asked that the person who fills this role also serve as an assistant to the President with the title Chief Technology Officer. We have roughly 25 or so assistants to the President. We convene every morning in the West Wing, and we uncover all the major issues of the day to ensure coordination and collaboration. The point? How can technology and innovation help to spur a larger set of policy priorities in areas you would otherwise not think are driven by technology? Education policy, healthcare reform, energy issues. All of these topics have very thoughtful areas where technology investments are playing a bigger and bigger role, and the President wanted to have a voice that could help weigh in on the best use of those investments to achieve our national objectives.
Well, can you give us an example of what maybe you discussed this morning?
Oh, well, we don't really discuss the nature of the conversations inside the administration, but I can share with you as an example of the topic areas. Healthcare reform is quite the topic of the day. It's obviously one of the President's core priorities. Earlier this week, I have the honor and privilege of serving as the chair of what's called the Health IT Standards Implementation Working Group. A lot of what we want to accomplish in health reform is better quality care, a focus on prevention and wellness. Well, to do that, you need to have more easy access to healthcare information with respect to patient privacy and security. To do that, you want to have data standards, technical standards that would allow for the free flowing of that information. We have billions of dollars through the economic stimulus package focusing on digitizing the nation's healthcare system. But if we get the technology strategy wrong, we might find ourselves wondering whether or not we purchased yesterday's technology as opposed to investing in the future. My job is to make sure that we're doing our best to invest towards the future.
But isn't it a case where technology moves so exponentially fast that you are investing in yesterday's technology even if you're buying today?
What is powerful about this policy lever, as an example, is it's one of the first times our federal government said, instead of buying technology and giving me a receipt for which you then qualify for an incentive payment, we were asking the healthcare system to demonstrate that they're meaningfully using the technology to achieve a broader healthcare reform goal, reducing infant mortality, increasing the level of folks who take screenings, and so forth and so on. So it's less prescriptive about the actual technology, and it's much more about what are the outcomes goals to achieve. And in that regard, it's creating a great deal of room for innovation, provided we have some basic standards that would allow us to communicate. These are the principles that we used in the foundation of the Internet, and how we ensured, really, who would have envisioned the kind of capabilities that we have on today's Internet back in 40 years ago when that first communication took place. So we're trying to bring those same principles in the health IT space. The same is true in the energy grid. We're making investments in smart grid technologies. We want to have open standards for innovation so that I can tell, there'll be an iPhone app that tells me to do my laundry at 6, not 4, to avoid the demand on the system. So there are going to be all kinds of innovations that we want to have flourish: healthcare, energy, education, and a number of other domains.
Can you talk a little bit about how some of the President's other technology policy goals feed into health, IT, and energy, smart grids, for example, broadband deployment, open internet, and open internet has become quite a controversial, net neutrality has become quite a controversial topic these days ahead of some of the actions that are taking place at the FCC. Will you talk a little bit about how those policy goals play into that?
Well, it's great to start with the foundation, and that is on September 21st, I had the pleasure of traveling with the president to Troy, New York. We visited a community college where the president met with students of all ages who wanted to retool for the 21st century economy. It was in this backdrop the president announced a very comprehensive innovation strategy. This strategy unveiled 3 pillars of the work that we're doing, and they directly answer the question that you've asked because they're very much tied together. The first of those strategies is that we as a nation are at our best when we invest in the building blocks of innovation. That is smart, secure infrastructure, which speaks to broadband and its relationship with what we hope to do with cybersecurity, that is to strengthen the capacity of the network to ensure we have more safe and secure electronic commerce, electronic government, and so forth. It also means that we're investing more in our basic research and development. We're on path to achieve the American Competes Act goal of doubling the funding for basic research in the core areas of the National Science Foundation, NIST, and the Department of Science within the Office of Science within the Department of Energy. It also means that we want to have a workforce second to none. The president has said by the year 2020, the United States will once again achieve #1 position in the number of our adult population with college degrees. These building blocks of innovation are critical. Then you move into the discussion about catalyzing innovation towards national priorities in healthcare and energy and education. And then last but not least, we try to spur competitive markets to promote productive entrepreneurship. And in so doing, because you understand that our economy is driven by a lot of entrepreneurs who are at the heart of our economic growth story for the last decade and beyond, that if you think of these things in their entirety, that last pillar of productive entrepreneurship is in ways powered by our commitment to open government. Now, open government in this context means how do we unleash the U.S. Patent and Trademark Database so that entrepreneurs of all types can better access the information and find areas where they can find that narrow opportunity for economic growth. Dave Kapos, the head of the Patent and Trademark Office, is committed to making that database more open and accessible, amongst a number of other key principles we can happily get into. So that foundation is what has to come together to achieve the president's vision for innovation. You asked the question about net neutrality.
That's right.
The president has been absolutely clear during the campaign. He repeated this in his announcement of the cybersecurity policy review, as well as he had on that day in Troy, New York, when he affirmed our principled commitment to net neutrality. Now, we are at the 100,000-foot view committed to the notion that there should be essentially a level playing field for entrepreneurs and big firms to ride our nation's infrastructure to compete with those applications that we think will deliver value. We are now in a period of time where the expert agency of the federal government, the Federal Communications Commission, under Chairman Janikowski's leadership, is undergoing a process to take that concept down further into the details. And we are all watching that process unfold.
How closely do you work with the FCC?
We work closely within the boundaries of our relationship. It's an independent agency, but we do coordinate in the National Broadband Plan. So we at the federal government level have been working on finding ways in which we believe there should be investments in broadband infrastructure to achieve our priorities, and we communicate them to the FCC. I had the honor and privilege of testifying at one of the FCC's panels, as did other members of the administration, to help inform the input towards the National Broadband Plan. And as the application of technology, whether it be in healthcare, energy, or education, you cannot talk about the digitization of the nation's healthcare records without asking the question, do we have sufficient broadband capacity in patients' homes, in physicians' offices? Perhaps I can give you but one example, because this is where the intersection falls in. The president, in one of his budgetary actions in fiscal 2010, said that what I would like to do is to reward quality of care. He went to the hospital industry and said, I would propose that we bundle payments for readmission rates. Now, for those of us that may not know the intricacies of healthcare, if we have chest pain, we go to the emergency room, there might be an intervention. Maybe they'll do some tests. Perhaps they might actually insert a device into your body to open up your arteries to make sure that we keep your blood flowing. Unfortunately, after you leave the hospital, and you maybe see a physician or you maybe not, you're really not tracked. And many people, unfortunately, return into that emergency room within 30 days or 60 days, and they have to repeat the same procedure. You're talking about $50,000, $60,000 in some cases per procedure, having to pay twice, when in reality, now that we know that you've come in the first time and you're at risk, there have been technologies in place for a decade that could remotely monitor you if you check your blood pressure and your weight on a regular basis and report your data in, that perhaps if there's a problem in your condition before coming to the ER, we could intervene in changing your medications. By creating that policy decision, that is to bundle the payment, it's in budget process, so we'll see how it unfolds. This should open up an innovative market where technology companies using our telecommunications infrastructure can now sell services to hospitals and patients to help them stay healthy while outside and earn an income stream, because now the hospital's financially incented to keep you healthy. That's the intersection of telecommunications policy and a policy objective of the president, in this case, healthcare reform.
Can you talk a bit about the role of the private sector and what's your relationship to technology companies in Silicon Valley and telecommunications companies? What role do they play in these strategies?
We want the private sector to play a very important role. I think of my job as successful if we can inspire the private sector to catalyze new ideas in achieving these broader objectives. So in every domain, in thinking about the nation's cybersecurity posture, I had the pleasure of traveling with Secretary Janet Napolitano on Monday of this week. We met with leaders from the banking sector in New York, and we asked the question, we all share a desire to harden and strengthen our telecommunications infrastructure. Perhaps together we might collaborate in ways that would invite entrepreneurial technologies and ideas to help us elevate our cybersecurity capability. Here it's the spirit of collaboration, banking sector, government, energy sector, working to bring new ideas that will help to shape this very difficult topic. In healthcare IT, just a week and a half ago, I addressed the Health 2.0 conference in Silicon Valley. Almost 1,000 entrepreneurs gathered to say, how can we embrace social networking and other Web 2.0 technologies to help keep people healthy and align ourselves to health reform? So I conveyed the message from the president. We need your success to achieve our goals. This is not just about insurance reform, although that gets the news. In all of the bills that are working their way through Congress, there are some key provisions that should unleash a new marketplace of innovation where those private sector players can deliver tremendous results.
And do you have any examples of some of those entrepreneurs that are currently involved in projects that you've launched under the presidency of President Obama?
Well, I can talk about a process example, just to say, first and foremost, when the president on his first full day in office said, I would like a more open government, he tasked then the unknown chief technology officer with the homework assignment. Provide me recommendations on how we build a more open government, one that's transparent, participatory, and collaborative. Traditional Washington would have us put a notice in the Federal Register, maybe hold a few hearings, and then to go back to our offices and work in teams and then release this proposed recommendation set for folks to consume. But we chose to eat our own dog food and embrace the president's spirit of open innovation. We used 3 entrepreneurial companies at no cost to help us listen to the American people and have them help shape these recommendations. We used a firm called IdeaScale at no cost to do brainstorming. So we asked the American people, what ideas do you have to make government more open? And they could vote each other's ideas up and down. And we had a lot of silly stuff in there, including, birthers and this and that. But we also had great ideas come up. We then mined that information and used a WordPress blog, another entrepreneurial free tool. So we facilitated a discussion on key topics like privacy policy and how Web 2.0 intersects. We presented an expert view and then we invited public comment, all using web technologies. Then we entered a drafting phase where we used a firm called Mixed Inc., again, another free entrepreneurial company, where they were able to allow the American people to co-draft the recommendations that we used to inform an Office of Management and Budget directive that we hope to have released to the American people. When it is, you will see exactly how much the input we heard from the American people, powered by these entrepreneurial companies, actually fed into the policy making of the American people. No lobbyists, no big insiders, no fancy process, open. And that's the spirit. We see all these opportunities in open government. This was no revenue, but we see a number of entrepreneurial companies in position to succeed in accessing government work.
You've been a proponent of cloud computing and how this could be a great way for efficiency and for just better technology within the government. Over the weekend, there was an example of some of the vulnerabilities of cloud computing with data loss for some T-Mobile subscribers on certain phones, on a certain phone. Can you talk a little bit about any lessons learned from that to take into account, maybe perhaps cautionary notes that you might be thinking with cloud computing?
And if you could start by describing what cloud computing is, please.
Sure. Well, actually, it's the definition of cloud computing that is at the heart of, I think, the misnomer about what happened this weekend. At its core, cloud computing is taking advantage of a distributed network of computational resources and software applications to achieve your personal needs. Much like a utility company, you don't necessarily order, I'd like to have a side order of power plant A and biofuel refinery B. You just say, I'd like a certain amount of energy that will power up my computer or my TV or what have you. Similarly, cloud computing, in its nutshell, tries to think of the computing capacity as a service, so that there's a wider range of distribution of what's needed, so that if I, in a moment's notice, need a significant increase, I don't have to quickly go buy a bunch of servers and technology and install them somewhere to achieve that increase, that I could actually, like a service offering, order more of what I've asked for, and that the network is capable of providing what it needs. The outage in this particular cell phone device that you've described was less about the core of cloud computing and really more about remote hosting of data. And in this particular example, perhaps, I don't know the mechanics, but I would presume maybe the data itself was residing in a particular set of servers in a transition of some sort or some kind of transformation of that server. The data might have been lost in transition. Traditional cloud computing would have actually had that information more distributed with much more redundancy built in. So any type of technology upgrade or you're swapping out a server really wouldn't have had that kind of experience. So it's a little unfortunate in the media to have the notion of that experience reflecting the notion of where the cloud is. But let's be even more specific. I'll make it as easy as I possibly can. The real value of cloud computing, while it is about making sure that America remains cutting edge on the next platform for the technology industry, which it is an opportunity for growth, the real story of cloud computing is I want to make it as easy as possible as an end user to say, I would love my computer to do X, and then to be able to have it do X without having to say, I want to do X. Now let me bring in the CIO. Now let me write some technical requirements. Now let me go find who can do this. Now let me hire a firm and spend 2 years designing and implementing. And by the time it's ready and they flip the switch, I kind of forgot why I wanted it on in the first place. Just to give you an example, when I was Secretary of Technology in Virginia, we used cloud computing to flip the switch on a very simple idea. The governor said at the time, if you're a startup, and you want to get going in Virginia, you could have up to a dozen state agencies require you to fill out forms. And each of them has their own process. And most of them are online. You could download a form and mail it in. But you don't know exactly what form you have to fill out, and it's confusing, and frankly, it's annoying. The governor said, hey, can't we just simplify it? Can't I go to one place, tell you what business I want to start, describe a little bit about what I want to do, and have it then fill out the forms for me, like a little intelligent wizard, if you will? Normal technology, this would have taken years of development, examples, strategy, software connectivity, legacy system migration, all these words. We used a cloud computing platform, 6 weeks from when we said we're ready to go with this project and found a partner to get it going. 6 weeks we flipped the switch. In our first year, 12,000 Virginia companies logged in, answered a handful of questions online, pushed print, and every form they possibly could need to fill out would be printed. They simply sign it with their wet signature, mail it in, they're done. Customer satisfaction through the roof, very cheap program. We spent a whopping $150,000 on getting it done. And it was executed quickly because in a cloud computing infrastructure, there's so much more you could share. So we said, who's got a form wizard online? Pulled that. Who's got a tool that helps me develop, if-then logic? Grab that. Put them together, get it going, and we've built an application. Forgive me if that's a little technical, but it was fast because the cloud enabled the shareability of those key components that we needed to make the program successful.
You are watching the Communicators program on C-SPAN. Our guest is Aneesh Chopra, who is the Chief Technology Officer for the United States. Cecilia Kang is with the Washington Post. Mr. Chopra, you've given us an example of a government use of cloud computing.
Yeah.
But a lot of the talk that we've had so far, isn't this something that the private sector would do without government input already?
In fact, the private sector is embracing cloud computing increasingly. A great number of companies in Silicon Valley and even those outside are finding ways to offer a portfolio of options. So many firms say, look, the traditional model is your IT department will acquire some technology, they'll hire the technicians, they'll load the software, they'll maintain and manage and run the infrastructure. If you'd like it that way, like it that way. We can start to bring in more tools and services, and perhaps you might be willing to experiment with a few applications that can sit in a cloud environment. But this is the difference. We have a shared need to more rapidly mature the cloud industry by asking ourselves two very fundamental questions. One, is our information secure in the cloud? That was sort of why you asked the question.
Right.
In that example.
Any lessons learned from Virginia, your time there?
Oh, sure. Well, the core of this is that we want to understand how we adopt best practices in cybersecurity, both in terms of the behaviors by which information is accessed. Sounds silly, but passwords, and how we get into the network, as well as best practices in how the data is managed, kind of the counter argument to the example where the servers were perhaps transformed and they didn't have a redundant capability. So the infrastructure has to be in a position to make sure that the data is secure. But if you think about these pieces, there's always a fundamental question: how do we ensure that security? And more importantly, if you think of it practically, what if I got your password, Cecilia, and now I've logged into your cloud applications? I've just hacked into your system, and now I have access to all of your data. So this notion of authenticating that I am in fact Cecilia is something that is maybe today's world password driven. Tomorrow's world might be a mixture of password and some physical connection, maybe a thumbprint or some other biometric, or perhaps other strategies that we are working on. So there's a shared interest between the private sector and the public sector to figure out how we get this very difficult question right. By the way, the president referenced this in his cybersecurity review. The 60-day review that he announced in May highlighted this notion of online authentication as one of our key priorities. In a second challenge in cloud computing, and this is a very important one, what if I don't like my cloud provider? How easy is it for me to transfer my data from cloud provider A to cloud provider B? Are there interoperability standards between cloud providers that would allow me to shift my allegiances so I'm not locked into one vendor? Again, the private sector and the government both would like that feature into this infrastructure. That's not today part and parcel of the system, but by collaborating, we might be in a position to move the industry towards that objective.
I'd like to ask you a little bit about spectrum, if I can change gears a little bit. This
Sure.
is called the oxygen of wireless networks. The president and his pick at the FCC, Julie Janikowski, have talked about their commitment to bringing more spectrum because they know mobile is going to be a huge part of the future. And just this week, and a lot of the spectrum, as we know, lies in different places, and a lot of it lies at the Department of Defense.
Yes.
And the Department of Defense has said, we want it, and the commercial sector said, we want it too. How are you going to sort out this tension, or any thoughts on how we can release more spectrum available for to meet the demands that we know that will be ahead?
So first and foremost, this is a sweet spot in my office. We're actively engaged on this issue, and we have processes in place. Part of my job is that I serve on the National Economic Council and the Domestic Policy Council, and I have certain responsibilities under the National Science and Technology Council. Don't you love all these alphabet soups? To help engage on these issues. So we are very much committed and coordinated to this notion. I would think of this, though, in two parts. The way you've just described it, it's a have not, either or proposition. And that is one worldview. But I'm I'm the chief technology officer. If I accepted that worldview, I will not be doing my job in service to the president. There is a third way, and we have to explore that third way. How might we, through innovative technologies, learn how to share spectrum, what's referred to as cognitive radio and other innovations that would say, look, in a given market, there may be certain bands that are open and underutilized. Perhaps we might recapture some of those bands as we need to so that we can basically maximize the capacity maximize the throughput, if you will, of our current capacity. So think of this as a highway. I might have the left lane dedicated for a purpose, but I'm only driving 20% of the time in that lane. The remaining time, that 80%, I don't want you to take it from me, because in today's world, what if I need it? Because I don't really know when I have to drive. But in a technology environment that embraces this notion of shareability, we're getting better and better at finding ways to actually allow you to basically rent out the underutilized portion of that left lane, and it's worth further exploration. A key part of my job is research and development, and I can assure you this is an important topic and one where the private sector and the public sector have a shared interest. I am an avid user of a particular device that is very hungry for data in the wireless spectrum.
Which device is that?
Okay, fine, it's my iPhone. But I'm also a BlackBerry user. I'm device agnostic in my role. But when my wife and I were apart, because I moved here before my family did, so she was in Richmond, I was in DC. She picture mailed me for the first time pictures of our now 3-year-old and 9-month-old daughters. My 9-month-old, first time she sat up, my wife took a picture, sent it to me. I'm sure that it occupied a reasonable amount of bandwidth. I started consuming picture mail I never did before. So my personal profile for data usage probably went like this, and then when we were apart, went like this. And now that I've learned web video, now my wife and I, when we go out to dinner, we actually downstream live YouTube clips of Sesame Street and other things so that our little girl can watch her lovely show while we're finishing up a nice meal at a wonderful restaurant. It has been a saving grace for me, but that is a data hog. And if everyone else is doing the same thing, we have to meet. That's an exciting story for our communications industry. This is more bandwidth usage, more revenue growth potential, get our country's economy moving again.
Does Silicon Valley want money from the federal government?
You know, it's a surprise. Of the 3 levers that I see as having the most impact in my office, one of them is research and development investments, where I think there's probably some interest in ensuring we continue making them. That may not be directly financing a given company, but could be a foundational investment that would enable more innovations to take place. So I think I would call that an indirect, yes, please invest there. There is the component of procurement. We spend $76 billion a year in IT procurement. Perhaps some might like us to open up more and more of those procurement opportunities to smaller and medium-sized companies.
The federal government spends $76 billion.
The federal government does. So how might we do this? I don't know. I think that's sort of nice that if we can open up those opportunities and it's the right thing to do, but I don't think it's their #1 priority. The third area is perhaps the most important area. We have at least in healthcare, energy, and education, through the stimulus package, a very explicit role for the government in establishing standards, technical standards for that particular industry. I think Silicon Valley is very interested because if we run the standards process the way people perceive it would be run, insiders, lobbyists, big companies all caballing in Washington to set the specs that make it virtually impossible for anybody else to play, if that's the outcome, we failed. If the outcome is here, it's open, it's simple, it's lightweight, you can build an app for that if you want, here's how you play, in health, energy, and education, that will be the mark of my success. So my presumption is in service to the president, I think Silicon Valley would far more interest that we build a more open platform for innovation through our standards process. I do think there are certain areas where procurement would be a big win that has some certain criteria that would be advantageous, and the R&D piece would as well. The elephant in the room is a little bit outside of my purview, although I listen to those concerns. That is a tax and regulatory policy in the venture capital sector. Clearly an important topic. It's a top-of-mind issue in the current economic climate. And I do listen closely to Silicon Valley's input and share that information with my colleagues and work my best to ensure a thoughtful outcome that represents the president's priorities but acknowledges the concerns that they've raised.
Final question.
You mentioned that part of your job is research and development and being on top of that, and there are the best minds within the government, but also outside the government, you're seeing the most cutting edge. What is your relationship with some of the companies out there that are at the cusp of some of the most exciting things out there? And are you regularly going into the labs of universities and companies like Google or other companies in Silicon Valley?
I am a fiend for great ideas and constantly on the prowl for learning and listening about what works. We are not yet named the President's Innovation and Technology Advisory Council. This is a group that is a sort of formal federal advisory committee type process that would bring in that input, and I'm hopeful that the names that will finalize through that process will be reflective of the kind of organizations that are there. While we await that sort of appointments process, I will say this. I have been very aggressive in my outreach. I've worked with the U.S. Council on Competitiveness to meet with the leading corporate chief technology officers and university leads. I've been meeting with state technology-based economic development coordinators. I've met with entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, you name it. My job is to make sure that I'm listening to their input to inform the policy guidance I offer the president. And I can't do my job if I'm not exposed to the best and the brightest ideas. And I'm so grateful and thankful that these firms have opened up their doors to expose their early thinking about these big issues and have been gracious to invite me in. An honor and privilege to serve.
What's been your biggest frustration working in the federal government?
Look, like everything else in life, you wish everything happened yesterday. When you were in the private sector, I was managing director at a firm where if I had to make a decision, I made the decision and I moved on and held people accountable for the results that were expected of them. I moved to state government and had to acknowledge that there was a larger set of stakeholders that had to be brought in, so we got to the right answer and acknowledged that there was benefit from having the collective input. But again, in a family-like environment in Richmond, you can sit them around the table, get them all around and say, let's come to a conclusion that makes sense and emerge with some consensus around next steps, and you could make it happen. Not as fast as you would like. I think in Washington, we have a desire from everyone I've met to get to right answer. There is this commitment to doing what makes sense. Then there's this fear that, okay, I love this, but now we've got to do blah, 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 blah. And sometimes that's a cultural just statement about blah, 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 but it's oftentimes, you know, sort of a short answer to something that actually, if you take the time to look at, could be done faster. So we're trying to create the cultural dynamics that would enable folks to be more open and innovative. I think this is why when we issue under Director Orzag's leadership, the Open Government Directive that will embody these principles that I've talked about today, transparency, participatory democracy, collaboration, it will start to accelerate the adoption of these capabilities into the DNA of our agencies, and I can't wait for that day. Final observation, the best part of the job, every single person I've met, the president's brought in, very hungry to deliver results. I have not had more open invitations to bring us in. I've now met with over, I think, 3/4 of the cabinet at this point. Every one of them leaves the room with, let's do this project together and let's make it happen quickly. It's an honor, it's a pleasure, it's exciting, and I thank the president for the opportunity, and I hope I serve him and the nation well.
Aneesh Chopra is the Chief Technology Officer of the United States. Thank you for being on the Communicators.
Thanks for having me.
Cecilia Kang, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.